the main presentation today is Fiddle Yard cassettes. That's what I mean by a cassette. It's just an object, a piece of track with a loco, could be any length, doesn't matter, with handles that you can pull out of your layout, pop a different cassette in, or pull out the cassette, turn it round and pop it back in so it goes in a different direction. So that's what the cassette means. But what we want to know is what's the benefit of having cassettes? What's the problem that it cures? And it isn't necessarily what every person wants. But if it's suitable for your layout, then here's what we're going to talk about. So there's the problem before we start. The problem with conventional sidings for fiddle yards is using multiple points. So for example, we come in the bottom here, we have to go through 1 point, 2 points, 3 points before we get to a storage line up here. So we've covered whatever, 27 inches, 30 inches, whatever, depend what scale you're working on. You've used maybe 30 inches of track before you even get to storage. Obviously here, you only have to traverse through 2 points to get to that one, but that's still maybe 18 inches of track work that's just wasted. So it can take up a lot of square footage, a fiddle yard. And if you look at this one, you can save some by fanning. In other words, 1 point that takes you to the top lines, another one taking to the bottom lines, that saves some acreage. But if you look at the very top one up here, it's so short. Fine if all you want to do is store one loco. But if you want to put a train in it, then you have to extend that further back. And all of a sudden, the whole storage area is getting wider and wider and wider. And that might not be a problem on, say, a large club layout or whatever. I'm not saying this is a panacea, it's for what's best for your layout. There's an example of one I took out of a magazine. It's obviously designed mainly for an exhibition, where the bottom part is what the viewing public see, and the other 80% or whatever is taken up purely with the fiddle yards. If you look closely, it boils down to only 1, 2, 3 loops. And although we've only got 3 loops, so in other words, only 3 trains going round at a time, we've got 63 points up here in the fiddle yard, not counting the points at the bottom, there's 63 up here. Okay, that means there's 21 points per loop. So you can handle maybe 10 different locos for every one loop. Not sure why you'd want to run 10 different locos in any one loop, but if that's what you want, fine. And then I came across this discussion on it. And that's another fiddle yard with 2 loops, but lots and lots of passing loops in the fiddle yard. And it takes up, as you can see in that shopping list, 36 points, 36 point motors, all the switches for the point motors, lots of wiring, lots of LEDs for indicators and so on, and lots of acreage. And once again, you can see the viewing public only see whether that is 8 feet of track, which is very, very wasteful unless you're happy to do that. The upside for some people is, I believe, that clubs like to have people bring along their own locos. So you can run your loco in one siding, somebody's other loco in another siding, and they can take turn about and all get fair shares of seeing their loco going round. Whether that's of any value to people at an exhibition, we can discuss that. And it's even more a problem, I think, if it's end to end, because you can see here, this one, I again took out just out of a magazine. a third of the entire square footage is hidden. It's not any scenics, it's there just for the fiddle yard. And if we wanted to extend it by adding in more sidings, if you want it to be the same length as up here, then that has to be extended further out. So the more sidings you add, then the percentage that's hidden gets greater and greater until you get to a point that most of your layout is unseen. And again, that's especially wastage at a show where you've only got 2 fiddle yards and the price you pay is to lose a third of your entire acreage. Now, there are ways around it, and a common one is a sector plate. There's another example from a magazine. And what they've done is they've managed to get 3 sidings in, but by taking away all the points branching off each other, then they can manage to get 3 different locos or trains in on that sector. And they simply rotate the plate round to the next track to line it up. And that's good. And it can be extended to have 4 tracks, depending on how much space you've got to maneuver the whole sector plate. That's one solution. Other solution is to have a traverser. This one's only got, what, 4 tracks, but there's no reason why that couldn't be 5 or 6 or 7 tracks. So the same amount of length is now accommodating multiple trains. The one we're looking at, if I remember correctly, is being moved by a stepper motor, as is that one, which is even longer in length, but only 5 tracks. Or mechanical, that one just sits on, it's usually drawer rollers. You get for opening drawers, and there's handles, so it's mechanically pulled back and forward. That's another option for traversers. But we're looking at back to this. This is another solution, which is the cassette. Taken from a magazine. That's the layout. That's the track plan. So at the end of the day, all it's got is 2 up and down lines, and we've got a spur here. And to handle that 2 loops, we've got multiple points. We've even got 2 turntables, so we can turn the rotation of the loco to go in a different direction. If I could show you a simplified version of this, just using a cassette, it would be that. You can take away all of the stuff you see at the bottom here, could all go away, because all you're doing is having different locos sitting in all those sidings, and you can have a collection of drop-in pieces like that. Either one short one, could be 2 short ones, could be 1 long one, depends what your use is. And you can drop in the cassette with the locos or the trains that you want to run at that particular time. So, if you use cassettes, the benefits are obviously cheapness. You've got one little bit of track that plugs in, compared to multiple points. Much cheaper. You don't have to buy solenoids or servos and all the electronics that go with it. Fewer problems, because you're not going to have broken wires or burnt out modules or whatever, because you don't have them. So there's been many fewer problems in terms of worrying about points jamming or frog switching. All the issues that go along with points are all removed. And they've got bring your own cassettes. That means that if you have a club layout, there's no reason why members couldn't build their own cassettes, bring them along and just drop them in and run their locos. And at the end of a session, they take them away and somebody else drops in their locos. So it makes it much easier to keep a track in large clubs about whose locos are on the layout at any one time. Like I said, you can have them commercial, or you can make your own. There's a commercial one. It's only 560 mil. What's that? 27 inches or something in length, and it costs 70 quid. But as you can see, it's got handles that allow you to pick it up and replace it with another one, or pick it up and turn it round. Quite a price for it ready-made. You can get them from DCC Concepts, or you can buy the Pico. The Pico now have this one, which is the modified version. I think it's out now. Either that is quite new. It's called the Pico Loco Lift. It comes in 300 mil pieces. The difference with this is it's flexible. As you can see above me, we've got interconnecting pieces. So if you wanted to buy two of those, if you want to spend 37 quid, you can make it double the length. You just plug together, slot in for extended length. So you can increase the length as you require it, but also the width, because the pieces are in two parts that slot like that, slide out and in. So you can make it N gauge or TT or HO or double O, depending, by sliding it in and then screwing up the screws, the bolts that you see at the top here. So it makes it adaptable in both length and in width, depending on your gauge. And but 300 mil isn't very long. It's okay for having a cassette with a loco on it. It's not great for a train to be dropped in. So I might want to be looking at building our own. That's the Pico Loco Lift. You can just see up there, there's a bolt. You can see where it slides in. There's the part there, and up the top there, where the two parts slide together to give you the gauge you want. And we have got conducting strips here for the loco to run on. We'll come back to that. Also commercially, if you wanted to, you can buy this from your models. It's not got any track. You lay your own track inside it, depending on what you want. There's the N gauge version. They're selling you a wooden box with a perspex roof, so you can see in to see what your contents are. It comes flat packed. You glue it together and put in your own track. There's no handles. You need to add your own handles at the sides to get a proper grip, especially if you're trying to carry any distance or rotate it in any way. So we can use commercial products, or we can make our own. Once again, what the benefits, again, it's cheaper. You're not going to pay 70 quid to DCC Concepts. For one, it's a fixed length. If you build it yourself and you're only working in, like in my case, a narrow gauge, I could have a tiny drop in that's only 6 inches long. Ding, that's it, ding. Right? Or it could be a whole 1 meter length or even longer. Depends how wide their arms go to carry them. So it could be any length, depending on what your needs are, and any gauge, depending on your needs. And also the level of protection, because one of the benefits of cassettes is not only are they drop-in, but you can use them as storage. Hence the one I just showed you that had a case around it and a perspex top. So you could put packing down the sides for transport. So not only does it run into the cassette, but down the sides of the rail, you've got foam and so on. So it's not going to be damaged in transit or in storage. So you can make your own level of that depending on your needs, especially if you're going to exhibitions. If it's at home, you probably just lift it, put it on a shelf and bring another one down. But especially for transporting, you want some level of protection. Right, so what are the options? One option is just to get a bit of track, put it onto a bit of wood, couple of handles on it, and you're good to go. As simple as that. Although, as I said there, don't use softwood because it's liable to expand and contract with moisture and temperature and so on. A bit of decent ply and probably varnish to protect it. What examples of that? Well, there's one. There's one made up from ply with a track put on it. So you can use that method of putting onto a piece of strong wood. This other one is on a piece of plastic conduit, but the conduit itself is onto a piece of wood. You can probably just see it out the way. Down the bottom here, you'll see that it's actually got a wooden base. It's got sides in this case, so that in transit you're moving it about and you tip it by any chance it won't fall onto the floor. Or more commonly now is using aluminium angle. And what you're seeing there is that the strips of the aluminium angle are actually the tracks. The locals will run, the wheels will actually run on the sides of the angle, assuming you put them in at the correct gauge. And what you can see behind me is a whole selection of different lengths, depending what your needs are. There you see a local actually running on the aluminium angle. If you're doing it aluminium, make sure if you're buying it from B&Q or whatever, that it is totally straight, because the aluminium is the track for the loco itself. It will oxidize like anything else, and is easily cleaned with a glass fiber brush. And one of the other benefits of having aluminium angle is that the loco can slide and flop in between the tracks much easier than trying to position it on actual rails, especially the smaller gauges where you're always fiddling, trying to get it round to actually sit properly on the rails. You'll just put it in, move it back and forward, it'll just drop in. Another tip I found was one of the members said, if you're doing it with aluminium, at best, and you're going to hold it with the aluminium, put tape on it. Because if you happen to pick it up when it's still got live DCC on it, you may get a shock and drop it and damage your locos. But with those little caveats, that's pretty straightforward. It's just a bit of wood with 2 pieces of aluminium on it. That's probably the more common one now. Right, so we've got this little cartridge and we've got the rail coming along and it stops and we want to drop this cartridge in somehow. How do we make sure that it's properly aligned? Well, one way is to make sure that the cartridge actually sits down on top of the rails. That's what is used. I'll show you in a minute. This sits on top of the rails. The other method is to butt them end to end. So the edge of the track here meets the edge of the cassette. And you have to have some way of ensuring that you get an alignment there. And the third way is to actually have a slot in the layout or a holder in the layout. So you drop it in and it can't move. It's held in place either in a slot or it's held in place between blocks of wood or some other kind of holder. Let's have a look. That's us back to the Pico. The top left is the one that we're selling up till very recently. As you can see, you just plop it right on top of the track. So you could plop it anywhere on the track. That's one of its benefits. And the local wheels just run along, jump up onto that and run along. The one on the right is the modern incarnation of it, the one where you can adjust. You can see the slides here and the screws. And you can just see that the metal just curves over the track and no more, just grips on and no more. I tried to blow it up. You can maybe just see it happening here. You can just see it going over the lip of the rail just there. Mm-hmm. Personally, I'm not a fan of that method because what you're seeing above you is two pieces of the L shape, and you're bolting them together with a couple of screws and hoping at the bottom end, the two ends do clip over the rail. It's a bit too prone to bending, I think. I'm not too, but it's very easy to use. You just plop it on the track and the locals will run straight into it. So that's what I meant by on top of the track. There's one where they just butt up. You'll see I've got two pieces. One's the permanent piece, the other piece is starting to mate with it, about to slide in. And because the checks at the top and bottom, it stops it from having any movement. It's kept in alignment. You can just see it happening there. He's pushing the cassette into the main line here and using the plastic tongues here to actually make the alignment happen. And thirdly, there's this method of the drop-in. What you'll see above me are the kind of brackets you get for mounting shelves and so on. And they've put two in and they've screwed them in very accurately so that the drop-in can't move and must align directly with the track. Or if I go back to the piece I showed you earlier, I showed you the bottom part of that. I didn't show you the top part, because in the top part, you can just see the slot that's been cut. So the cassette drops in there and there's no slop. They can't move at all. It just sits in there. So that's three ways you can get alignment of the cassette. The next question is, well, how do I wire them? How do we get connectivity electrically? Well, you could use plug-in sockets. In other words, there's two wires soldered to this rail, two wires soldered to that rail, and a plug-in socket, which is a bit, it means you've got to drop the cassette in and then plug them together, and then remember to unplug before you lift the cassette out. It's doable and it's simple. Or you can use wedges, as I'll show you in a minute, or tongues. I'll cover the last two separately. There's an example of wedges. They've used the aluminium elves and added extra aluminium in the shape of a kind of U shape. And that means that when you then offer it up to the permanent track, it just slips in. So this is dual purpose. It's giving you the rail alignment at the same time as giving you the electrical connectivity. So you can see that the blue wire above my head here to the rail goes on to this top piece. And then when you plug in the cassette, this track is now live as well. You slide the cassette out and you break the connection. So you can use that method. There's one I showed you earlier for the plastic, but closer up. And you can see what they've done there is they've got copper clad board, cut a slot down the middle, another bit of copper clad board, soldered the track onto the copper clad, but it's cut down the middle so there's no shorts. And then they use brass, so when you push the two together, the tongues scrape along and give you the electrical connection. So we have those options. Other options are if you have the drop-in type, our good old friend, the pogo pins. So the permanent track has got contacts and there's pogo pins underneath the cassette. So when it's dropped in, it makes the electrical connection. Somebody else came across the idea of, if I go back to here, if instead of having got to all the bother of making up these special parts here, if you simply had an L bracket there, an L bracket there, line them both up and put a bulldog clip on them. And that gives you the proper alignment, and the bulldog clip acts as the bridge electrically as well. So that's another option. There's tongues, again, this time bolted on, or I think it's pop riveted on here to make the connection. And lastly, I'll just show you a little video to show you how smoothly locos operate without rails, just sitting in the tracks of the aluminium. And that's what I thought would be worth having exploring. I say it's not for everyone. If you've got a roundy, you probably don't need that, or you might want it anyway, just from the point of view is it gives you more flexibility and saves you lots of point work and so on, and lots of space. If you want a roundy, but you don't have the space at the back of the layout to have huge amounts of passing loops, then you can use this method. I've only showed my example of having one drop-in. There's no reason why you couldn't have a couple of drop-ins at the top, so you can have a selection of locos. I think it's particularly useful for end-to-end layouts where you can have multiple locos without taking up too much of the shelf space. Anyway, gents, any thoughts or questions or comments, particular views on it?